23 and Deuteronomy 7. And then also what we just finished in Joshua chapter 23 to kind of remember and get this into historical perspective. Now, Exodus 23, we know that God is speaking through Moses to that very first generation, that generation that ultimately would not be going into Canaan, into the land that God promised them. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 7, he's speaking to that second generation also through Moses, because that would be the generation that would actually be crossing over the Jordan River and going into the land of Canaan with Joshua, because we know that Moses, although he was able to go to the mountain and to see the full extent of the promised land, and God showed him where all of the different tribes were going to be, that God took him at that very moment when he was finished. So God did promise over and over and over and over and over again that he would absolutely deliver the land's inhabitants into Israel's hand. That's a very nice biblical colloquialism to say, I'm going to kill them all. They're all going to be gone. They're going to be wiped out. You're not going to have to worry about them anymore. And he warned them, do not make a covenant with them. And most assuredly, don't go do anything dumb by making covenant with these gods that they're going to be, that they already worship. It's going to be a snare, and it's going to cause you to sin against God. Do we not see that today? Not even in Israel. We can see that today. I can look out my front door in the middle of nowhere, and I can see that it's happening here in our own community, in our own nation. He told them to utterly destroy the nations. Don't leave any survivors. Do we see the snares even in just the first 2 chapters of the Judges? Don't we see them? In Joshua 23, we see God fulfilled it. God did exactly what he said he was going to do. He fought for Israel. He defeated the nations. And then right as Joshua was about to die, he warned them again not to leave the people of the nations in their land. You have to drive them out. But he also said, you know what? If you don't do your part in driving out the inhabitants, what did he say God was going to do?
Withdraw the covering.
Yeah. He's not going to do it either. If you're not going to do what I've told you to do, if what I've done isn't good enough for you, if you're not going to walk by faith, if you're not going to live by faith, I'm done. I'm not going to keep giving you all these inhabitants. I'm not going to keep giving it to you if you're not going to do what I'm telling you to do to begin with. And he took it a step further and he said, don't mix with the nations. Do not intermarry with them. Do not mix in with their gods. It's going to be a snare, a trap. He even called it a whip on their side and thorns in their eyes. And it would stay that way until Israel was out of their land. And we know the rest of the story. We know that that happened. It wasn't immediate, but it happened. And then we get in to Judges chapter 1. Now, while these main cities or these main nations had already been defeated by Joshua, every tribe still needed to destroy what was left, the people that were left in their individual land and their own inheritances so they could possess it. They were still responsible for being obedient, but each tribe unto itself, because now they had all their own land. So before they got started, they asked God a question. Now, what was the question, first of all? What did they ask God?
Who's going to go first?
Yeah, who's going to go first? Why did it matter who went first? If every tribe was supposed to deal with its own land, what in the world did it matter who was going to go first? Everybody should have just been fighting all at once. I mean, they're dealing with their own land. But they asked, and God answered them. And who did he say should go first?
Judah.
Judah. Why Judah?
Because he's the biggest.
He wasn't the biggest. Manasseh was the biggest.
Manasseh
Didn't
was
they just do lots?
No, he just said Judah will go up. I've given the land into his hand. Who was the firstborn? Not of the tribes, but who was the firstborn of Jacob? Judah. Judah was the oldest. So I think he just thought, well, let the oldest go first. I don't know. We don't know why Judah had to go first. But he decided he wasn't going by himself. Because who did he ask to kind of tag along? Simeon. Good old Simeon. Which really does make sense, because where was Simeon's land allotment?
In the middle of Judah.
in
Yes,
the middle of Judah.
it's in the middle of Judah. So really, if I was Simeon, that would make a lot of sense, because if Judah gets conquered, it's not going to take much for us to get conquered. We're not going to have anybody to protect us. So it made some sense. So Simeon said, sure, we'll go help you. And when we decide to drive out the people, you come over here and you help us. Not a problem. So far, have they done anything wrong? No.
No, not right now.
Now, were Judah and Simeon successful?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. God gave them victory over the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Please, please, please note, so much, especially in the Tanakh, it will say God gave. Not they won, not they took over, not they destroyed, but God gave them into their hand. Now, this poor King Adonibezek, he kind of ran away. He was a little scared. So he ran away and he was captured. And he did not treat people very well during his reign. So how did God repay him? How is it? The same way. What was that same way? Poor little dude.
Is he the one they cut off his thumbs and
Of his thumbs and his big toes.
His thumbs and his big toe.
What's the significance of cutting off the thumbs and the big toe?
Well, yeah, you really can't do much without your thumbs.
can't go to war?
Be
warriors.
You
They
really
couldn't
can't.
do bow and arrows or whatever.
Oh, there you go.
Without them.
Yeah.
And your big toes, that's your toe actually that you use for balance. And so you're really not going to be able to run. You're not going to be able to really fight very well. And what's so funny is the king acknowledged as much. The king even said, yeah, this is being done to me because I was really bad and harsh to the other kings.
I thought I read that that's what he had been doing to people that he captured.
Yes. Poor treatment of the kings that he had conquered, and he would do it to them. And so God said,
Turnabout's fair play.
yeah, that's what was in my head. Go ahead, Brandy.
So what happens here? So he dies. So does he bleed out? And that would have been a very slow to bleed
No,
out.
I don't think they bled out, did they? It just made them not
Said he
warriors.
died, but I'm just being silly, I
So-
guess.
It says then they actually brought him into Jerusalem, and it just says he died.
He died.
So we don't know. I mean, it
I'm
probably.
just picturing this in my mind.
I know him. Yeah, I don't.
Sorry.
No. See, our minds work a lot alike, Brandy. That's like I thought. So. So Judah actually fought in Jerusalem, and he conquered it, and he set the whole thing on fire. He fought in the hill country. He fought in the Negev. He fought in the lowland. He took Hebron. He took Devere. So we can say that Judah was actually obedient.
Yeah.
Up to verse 11, everything's going really, really good. Judah's being a very good example. Judah and Simeon are being really good examples of what the other tribes are supposed to do. So, yay, Judah. For now. Then we get another glimpse at good old Caleb. Same Caleb we saw in Joshua, same Caleb we saw in in the book of Numbers. He was one of the 12 spies. He and Joshua were the only ones from that first generation who were allowed to go into the promised land, into Canaan. Now, he was actually from the tribe of Judah, and he participated. He was 85 years old, and he's out there fighting. He's fighting giants of Anak. He's out there fighting. He's out there conquering. He's out there doing his thing. So because of that, he got the land of Hebron, Hebron. And he gave his daughter lands in the Negev, which isn't very good land. And then to become his son-in-law, Othniel took Devere.
I did.
So now not only do we see the tribe of Judah and Simeon being obedient, but now we kind of narrow it down and we see that Caleb, even in his old age, is still being obedient to God. He is still driving out his enemies and not allowing them in their land. And then we jump back about Judah. Now, Judah still has some conquest and with Simeon, so they're still out there going strong. But it says that they were living at peace with the Kenites. Are those supposed to be living at peace with anybody who'd been living in their land? No. They should only be digging holes to bury the bodies. I mean, truly. They shouldn't have been there, but they said, yeah, you know what? They haven't done anything to us. They're good people. They're living at peace. They're okay with us. We're okay with them. Why would we be so dumb as to go in and wage war against these people who may or may not be able to defeat us, who may or may not have brethren somewhere else that could come and take us over? You know what? We're copacetic. Let's just let them stay. And they did. He conquered Hormah. He conquered Gaza. Go figure, right? Ashkelon, Ekron, because God was with them. But he never even tried to drive out the inhabitants of the valley. Why?
They had iron chariots.
They had iron chariots. Would God have allowed them to conquer?
Yeah, I thought that was funny.
Who else had iron chariots? Pharaoh.
Mhm.
Iron chariots. And where did Pharaoh end up?
It's the bottom of the sea.
In the bottom of the
Yep.
Big Red Sea. Exactly. It's not like they didn't have an example of iron chariots and God beating people with iron chariots. And this is where I got when we talked about in Joshua, and it's so true. When we personally, in our own lives, we come up against our own versions of iron chariots, do we not? When we see things that we do not think that we can conquer, when we come up against mountains we do not think that we can go over, around, through, or that God will move, and we don't know what to do, and so we just say, well, this must be the roadblock. God doesn't really want us to do what he's said that he wants to do. You know, it's like he changed his mind suddenly. And so we have two ways that we can sort of approach these things when they come into our lives. We can say, number one, we have God, so what? Iron chariots, we have God, so what? Mountains, we have God, so what? Kamala Harris, we have God, so what? Or we can choose the second way. And we can say, we don't have God, now what? This is too big. Now what? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Now what? Move? You must be kidding. So now what? And they chose the latter. They decided, you know what? They've got iron chariots. Well, now what? And at that point, Judah became disobedient. And he let them stay in the land with iron chariots. And my thing is, if you don't think that you can defeat them with iron chariots, what's to keep them from coming against you and conquering you with those iron chariots? And if you want to play nice and you want to go along to get along, what are you going to compromise so that they don't come after you with their iron chariots? Instead of saying, we have God, bring them on. But they bent. And it doesn't tell us that they had a lot of compromises, but you know they had to. How else were they going to keep from being conquered? And then in verse 21, who do we see now?
Benjamin.
Benjamin, little tiny Benjamin. Come on, the last son, the one that your daddy cried over, the one that everybody got in trouble for leaving in Egypt in jail. Your descendants, now your little tiny tribe. And what did they decide to do?
Not
Well, they kind of followed the example.
Yeah. Judah destroyed the city of Jerusalem. But Benjamin let the Jebusites hang around. He let them stay there. So now we've got Benjamin being disobedient. Now in verse 22, it says the house of Joseph. So who is the house of Joseph? What two tribes?
Manasseh and Ephraim.
Yes, Manasseh and Ephraim. Doggone Manasseh and Ephraim, right? They're always causing trouble. So Ephraim goes into a place called Luz, and he actually made a deal with a man who was living there because the man told Ephraim where the city gate was, so he could kind of get in there and conquer it. So Luz, he actually renamed Bethel, the house of God. Now, if you remember your history, in the future, Bethel plays a really not so good part in Israel's history when it becomes part of the northern kingdom. Really bad spot. So renamed. But then, when that man moved away, he just went someplace else and he just renamed where he ended up Luz. And he built a new city. So not only did the inhabitant live and was allowed to leave, he was also allowed to build a new city. What part of this did they not understand? I'm thinking God spoke pretty good Hebrew. And the inhabitants of this land were the Hittites. And then they conquered Gezer. And guess what? They left them there too. Manasseh didn't take possession, or took possession, but he made them slaves. And look at one of the places that he took over, Megiddo. Boy, does that not play into end times in the valley of Megiddo. And Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo. If this tribe was strong enough to enslave all these people, they were strong enough to annihilate every single one of them. And they didn't do it. And they were disobedient. Then we have Zebulun, good old Zebulun, right? Get all the way to the end of the alphabet, and now we're going to see some goodness come out of it, right?
Nope.
No. Now we have Canaanites living in Ephraim, Manasseh, and Zebulun. We have Hittites living, and Jebusites living in Benjamin and Judah and Simeon. So then we have Asher. So now we're going to go to the beginning of the alphabet. And they conquered all kinds. They conquered Akko and Sidon, and Halab and Achziv, and Helba and Afik and Rehav. And they were disobedient. Disobedient. We just might as well Rush. We used to be huge Rush Limbaugh fans, and he would always say ditto, ditto. We can just put ditto, like all through our Bible. Just write ditto, 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 ditto. Naphtali, same thing. Made them slaves. We now have Canaanites in 5 tribes. Almost half of all tribes now have foreigners in the land and living disobediently. And then some of the folks, these good old Amorites, they decided they were done. So then they kept going and they persisted until Ephraim got strong enough to enslave them. But again, Ephraim didn't destroy them. So the Amorites tried, went up against them, went up against them, went up against them until finally Ephraim could destroy him, was in a good position to destroy him, did not destroy him, decided to enslave him, and now look at the mess we are in. And we haven't even gotten into the judges yet.
Yeah, I marked my map with X's where they left the cities, and they really did themselves in. I mean, they left their coastal cities free. They left the main part of the inland free. I mean, when you're talking about a battle plan, they really weren't too wise.
No, they really weren't. And who were they really leaving kind of hung out there to kind of, keep out the enemies coming in? They left those 2.5 tribes.
I just couldn't believe where they left people. Yeah.
And what good were those 2.5 tribes going to do if we have enemies coming this way, enemies already coming this way, and those 2.5 tribes can't do anything? And they're backed up against the Jordan River. Huh. Anyone else see anything, or did chapter 1 just really make you want to start yelling?
Wasn't this time also part of that northern Mediterranean Sea? Wasn't that still, was that at that time part of the trade route? Bringing in supplies and things still that early or not?
It probably was. Because this nation, or these kingdoms in this nation of Canaan, they were very rich. They didn't have, they lived in walled cities.
That's what I figured.
So they had to be, especially like you said, along that western coast.
Yeah, the whole northern part there could have been shut down.
Yeah, the whole thing could have been taken over. The whole thing could have been taken over if they had just done what God said. And they didn't. And we love to get onto these poor little, Israelite people. But don't we find ourselves in a lot of hoopla because we just choose not to be obedient? Because fear sometimes is greater than our obedience. Or at least the excuse of fear is easier sometimes than our obedience. Now, we have a little conundrum in chapter 2. In chapter 1, where was Joshua? In Judges chapter 1. Where was Joshua?
Well, he died.
Dead.
He's dead.
He was dead.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
I thought it was a trick question.
He was just looking at me like, hi-ya. No,
Yeah.
he was dead. He's in the ground somewhere, or in a cave. He's dead. He wouldn't have been in the ground, in the cave. He's dead. But where is he in chapter 2? He's very much on this
Still
side of living. He's alive. So obviously, chapter 1 and chapter 2 are not chronological.
Right.
Chapter 2 would have come before chapter 1. Now, in our Western, very, very linear-minded thinking, that drives us up the wall. We want things in order. Start me from the beginning, get me to the middle, slide me through to the end, and we want it all to be nice and neat. Hebraic thinking, they don't care. They could be today, 1,000 years in the future, 400 years in the past, tomorrow, and then go back to yesterday, and then finally get today. They don't care. So they write all over the map, and it doesn't tend to bother them at all because we like nitpicky details, and they just like to give you big picture. And so here's another just big picture, because Joshua is now alive. Now, I'll give you a hint, without giving away too much about next week. In chapter 3, he's dead again. So he's just alive in chapter 2, and then in chapter 3, he's not there anymore.
It's just like movies that have these flashbacks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get so confused.
Except like prequels that happened like 25 years after the first movie. And I'm like, but where did these people come from?
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't look like Luke Skywalker to me. So anyway, but yes, so he is now very much alive. So we are obviously not in chronological order. And if you finished your lesson this week, you know we're about to be way out of chronological order in just a few minutes. Anyway, so you just kind of say, okay, God, here we go. All right. So who shows up besides Joshua in chapter 2?
For the Lord.
Yeah. So now we've got an angel
Angel of the Lord.
that came up from Gilgal to Bochim. And he talks to him. And what's he tell him? He says, I brought you.
They haven't obeyed. There'd been that God had basically done everything he was supposed to do and wouldn't break covenant, but you have not obeyed me.
Exactly. So what's he going to do now?
Therefore.
Yes, therefore. What's the therefore? Basically, he said, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm not taking care of it for you anymore.
Yeah. You could have had it. So can you just imagine God's frustration? I had a very frustrating day with our 3-year-old and our almost 2-year-old today, just not wanting to do what I'm telling them to do. Like pick up that sock for like the 25th time today. Get your sock. Can you imagine how frustrating this had to be for God?
Oh my gosh.
Even though he knew, because he is omniscient, right? And our future is his past because he's beyond that. This had to be so frustrating watching it play out.
Well, he even repeated the words that Joshua had said verbatim.
Well, yeah. Which were exactly the same thing that Moses told them.
Right.
Way back in Exodus, again in Deuteronomy. He reiterated to them in Leviticus. It's all the way through the whole law. If blessings for obedience, curses for disobedience, it's not like they hadn't heard it like 4,000 times. Except, had they? We're going to look at that. So at Bochim, Israel was confronted by this angel. And it was called Bochim. Did anybody look up what Bochim means?
Place of weepers.
Yes, because they wept. That I am at the end is plural. So it means it was the place of many weepings. Of many weepings. Because God said he'd no longer drive out their enemies. Well, why did they care? They made them all slaves. So why cry now? They weren't obviously too interested in their enemies being driven out because they had the opportunity. God told them he would do it. And they're the ones who wouldn't go and drive them out. So to me, it's like, why are you crying now? You didn't want them out in the beginning. So now what are you worried about?
Kind of like us, huh?
Yes, exactly like us. And that's why I don't like this, Diana. I don't like it. Because
Too close.
I keep seeing myself, and I want to do my Bible study with my feet in the air so my toes don't get stepped on. But yes. And then he goes on to explain in verses 6 through 10. This is all history. And he's telling them again and again that they served the Lord all the days of Joshua and the days of their elders who survived, who had seen all the great work of the Lord. And then he died, and they buried him. And this, to me, is the saddest verse in probably all of Scripture, because it says, all that generation were also gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. And whose fault was that?
that first generation.
Well, the second generation.
Second
Second
generation.
I mean, that generation that died.
Didn't teach him.
Yeah.
Didn't teach him. Didn't pass it on.
But Joshua did. And they followed God as long as Joshua was there. But as soon as Joshua died, the elders died, the high priest died, they all died. And then
nobody
this
was
generation
left
after, nobody carried the torch. Nobody. It's like Joshua died, the elders died, the high priest died. Everybody took their torch and dumped it in a big old vat of water, and they never passed it on. And so then there's this generation that came up that not only had no clue how they got there, why they were there, what happened in their past, what God had done. They didn't even know God.
So that goes back to my point from before. The high priest is supposed to be reading the law to them certain times every year.
Yes.
And if they're not doing that, then the people as a whole are not going to know, A, what the law is, and B, what their traditions are.
But they also had Levites living in all of the tribes.
Exactly.
Levites were given land inheritances in all of the tribes, and these Levites dropped the ball. But,
Exactly.
but parents didn't pick it up.
That's what I was going to say. You know, they knew the law too because they had heard it. And I just wonder where America dropped the ball. What set of generational parents, quote, dropped the ball? That's what I thought. I agree with you. I've got number 10 circled and circled and circled and underlined and marked off. I just thought, you know, that's us in a nutshell right now in America. I mean, I think that's a good, to me, that was talking about now. But I just wondered here in our time now, exactly when did we drop the ball?
All of our parents' generation quit going to church.
It's been coming down a long time, you know. It just was it after the wars when people didn't
Really rebelled.
It was a slow fade.
yeah,
it was a slow fade. I truly believe it was a slow fade.
Yeah, it is.
And there's a whole song that talks about slow fade, but I really think it was a slow fade. I think we can look back. Ladies, you're probably going to hate me and you may turn me off, but I think it started with this big women's lib movement. I think during the war, women went to work because the men were away. Women went to work. I'm not saying that was a horrible thing, but I'm saying that. And then we brought along things like daycare centers, early schools. And then when the men came back, women didn't want to give up their jobs. They enjoyed working. And so now we had to figure out, what are we going to do with these children? And so, daycares became more prevalent. Everybody looked to the government to figure out what to do about these children. And then, women were not being paid the same as men. And I think it just snowballed. And then you're looking at, so much that went on, especially, then we're right on top of the civil rights movement, and I'm not saying that was bad at all. And then we're right on top of Vietnam, and we're right on top of, the free love movement, and we're right on top of the love, and then we're right on top of taking God out of schools, and then we're out of, with women's lib came, abortion, it came a lot of stuff. Then you see they didn't want to be married anymore, so then they just lived together and they raised, children sort of halfway together. And then you see cults coming, and then so it was just all of this stuff that just kept happening. And then I look at and I go, but where was the church in all of this? Where were the churches standing up? Where
Being
was
quiet.
where was the generation who knew better? And why didn't they do better?
We tend to think as Christians we should just live our life and not speak about it. But I think we're in a time, personally, this is my opinion, that we've got to speak because the other side is being loud. And being quiet is no longer, and don't misunderstand me, we have to live the life. That's not what I'm saying. But I think when we have the opportunity, we've got to use our voices. You know, that's the way the communists, the Russians, if you look at their decline, that's how they indoctrinated a whole generation, was starting with the children.
Yep.
Deuteronomy 6, 7-9 says, you will teach them, your children, or the laws diligently to your children, and you'll talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lay down, and when you rise up. And right after that says, and so then when they ask you why you do these things, you have a point of reference to bring them back to, and you can say, but look at everything God has done. And I don't think that we do that. I don't think that we openly speak about God to our children, you know, as an everyday language. We can't wait until they're in Sunday school or in children's worship or in a private school or at their grandparents' house or something. We can't wait for that. You know, God should not be a name that we only speak once a week. God's name should be spoken as if he actually does live in our homes with us, as if he actually does have a prominent place, a number one place in our lives and in our families. We have to speak of God and of his laws as just a common language and common conversation in our homes. Otherwise, kids don't get it because everything else is so loud to them. And we have to make God common, in not God common, but we have to make the fact that there is a God common in their life and not as some foreign thing that they only have to deal with during a boring sermon on Sundays or Saturdays, whenever you go to church. We can't do that. Go ahead, Miss Hadley.
Remember when I was 16, 17, I started going to church because a really cute boy went to church.
Oh,
And but I was a listener, so I was listening to the sermons. I was paying attention to what was being said, and I realized that what was being taught during the sermons didn't really seem to have anything to do with the Bible.
mm-hmm.
It was all political.
Mm.
And that didn't feel right to me. And I quit going to church, and it turned me off from any religion at all for years and years and years. Well, until our youngest son was born, in fact. So I think that our churches have changed perhaps their agendas.
Oh, they have.
Over what used to be the agenda of a church. And that has affected the whatever that word is, that's affected the world temperament.
And I will say this, and I will say it, and I will stand up in church if anybody wants me to, and I will say it. If you're waiting for church to teach your children, you're going to be waiting a long time. It is not the church's responsibility to teach your children about God.
I don't disagree with you.
No, and I'm not saying this against you, Miss Evelyn, not at all. But Oscar and I have had this conversation, that we wish there was a class for our little ones to go into, and then we're like, well, why? We can't sit around and wait for churches, to educate us. We can't even as adults expect church and sit around and wait and let that be our primary education. And you're not, because you all are here and you all are studying and you all are being Bereans. And so which is rare and not common in today's society. And one of the things that Oscar and I have talked about, and I may have mentioned something here, I'm seeing for the first time, and some of you are older than I am, and maybe you've seen it before, but typically we only have to kind of look at and monitor, if you will, the generation behind us. You know, what are they doing? Because they've got all these weird mindset things coming on and all these weird trends and things. And so that's where our focus has always had to be. We've had to watch those coming up behind us. But what I'm seeing now is we also have to be leery of the generation that's ahead of us. Because there are a lot of crazy, wonky things that this generation ahead of us is actually buying into. And so those of us who would love to watch the example of the older people and be able to stand on their example, we don't have that all the time because they're not standing on a good example. They're not being a good example. They may have started out like Judah started out, being very obedient, but they're not anymore. And then we've got this generation behind us, you know, kind of pushing in and wanting that agenda, you know, push this way. And we're also being pushed on this way because we don't have a safe place, for lack of a better word, in the generation ahead of us to give us advice about how to deal with all of this, because they're buying right into it. And so we're getting squeezed from both sides. And then don't get me started about the pulpits that are in this nation that are doing crazy stuff.
And I think that's where what is so difficult, because I was a completely unchurched person. So I needed that. I needed that truthful church, that church based on the Bible to teach me. And it wasn't until Evan was born that I fell into a church that was Bible based. But you don't always find those.
No, you don't.
And
especially today.
Yeah.
Especially, you're right, especially today. And so, wow, it's what a disservice those churches that aren't Bible based are doing to their congregations. I guess that's basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
During a Bible study one day, it happened during the whole Waco thing, that whole thing, and people, one of my classmates said, well, she just didn't understand how all of these people at Waco fell into this. And I said, as a brand new Christian, I said, well, I'm here at this Bible study and I know nothing about the Bible. And Joanne was the name of our teacher. And I said, Joanne could tell me anything and I would believe it.
Mm-hmm. And they are. Those ears are being tickled. They just want to hear, and your ears they just want to have their ears tickled, and they want everybody to say, somebody that they see as a godly authority, to say, you're okay, it's all good. You can pray to non-binary God and he's going to bless you, and everything's going to be okay. But everything's not going to be okay. Right. And then when we stand there, we're like, well, but you know, that's really not our place. We really shouldn't be. Why should we not? Then whose place is it? If we don't speak, who's going to? Nobody. And then whose responsibility is it?
And that's what I told her. I said, if I didn't have you guys telling me that the Bible is the authority, mm-hmm. then I could just say, I could just trust that Joanne is telling me the truth. But you guys are telling me that I have to go to the Bible
Mhm.
and see what the Bible tells me.
Yes.
And truly, that's the reason, that's the kind of church I fell into. But
Those are harder and harder to find.
yeah,
They're harder and harder to find. And I will never pretend to have all the answers. I won't, because I don't. But if this, we're only in chapter 2, and look how convicted we are. We're in week 1.
exactly.
So we got 6 more weeks to go, right? And between Joshua and Judges, I think we'll be ready in December to go, okay, it just takes some time to breathe. But this is good. This is good because it's not us convicting ourselves. This is the Holy Spirit convicting us and saying, look at what's going to happen. Look at the slow fade. Look at your slow fade. And it has to start with us. We cannot expect it to come always from a pulpit. We cannot expect it to come, heaven forbid, out of Washington, right? We can't expect it to come out of Charleston. We can't expect it to come from our neighbors. It has to start with us. It has to. And then it has to go from there. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all. So, in verses 11 through 23, see how I bring us all back? This is what I call Israel's sin cycle. And I know in your homework they had you kind of write it out, but I don't remember what page it was on. I didn't write it down. But if you look up at the top of my whole cycle, because it was secular for 320 some odd years, it was secular. They did evil. And they did what was right in their own eyes. And they did what was evil, and they followed other gods. That's like number 1. That's what they did. God's anger was then provoked. And we saw that in verse 14 and 20. God gave them over to their enemies. The people got all stressed out, and they started groaning and moaning to God. So God raised up judges to defeat their enemies. Israel was at rest and peace until they got back up to the top, and they started following false gods again, and around and around and around. And you want to tell me God's not patient for over 320 years? He watched them go round and round and round in circles. And you want to tell me he's not patient? Now, these judges, they're called Shaphatim. I am, because there are more than one of them. And it means to judge or to vindicate or to punish. Now, here's the question. Were they judging Israel or the nations?
Both.
Israel.
What do you mean?
Israel.
Who were they judging? It means the Shaphatim were to judge, to vindicate, and to punish. So then, who were they judging? Were they judging Israel or were they judging the nations? Now, somebody said both.
Yes.
I think both.
Mark said both.
Definitely Israel.
They were definitely, yes, they were judging Israel.
Why would
Because
they
Israel knew.
the world and other nations?
I
Israel
think,
knew. So they can't be let off. They're guilty.
absolutely. But it's the part of what a Shaphatim, the job of the Shaphatim, to vindicate
Mhm.
and to punish. They are vindicating Israel, right? But they are punishing the nations or Israel's enemy who came upon them. So I would have to say both. Every one of these judges that we're going to look at were warrior judges. They just weren't ones that sat at the gate and listened to, both sides of an argument, kind of like what we saw in Ruth, where they went outside and Boaz, they took the shoe and slammed it, and that meant everything was okay, and Boaz could marry Ruth. So it wasn't just that. it was more. They were the vindicators. They were God's instruments of wrath and his judgment upon the nations who had come up against Israel.
So did they only have one at any particular given time? They didn't have overlapping?
They did have, we're going to see that as we move on, that they did have some that were overlapping, and some we don't know a whole lot about. Some just say they were judged. I mean, we don't know a whole lot about some of them, and some we know a whole lot about. So we're going to go through that as we go through the next, actually the next only 5 weeks, because week 7 is something else. Why was all of this happening to begin with? Why this whole sin cycle thing? Why this whole time of the judges? Why did any of this have to happen? It goes back to Judges 1, where it says they did not drive out their enemies and the inhabitants of the land. And God said he left these inhabitants. Why? Why did he leave them?
To test.
Wanted to go in their own way.
Yeah,
it was
to test them. To test them. The Hebrew word for that is nakah, and it means to test the quality, to put to the proof, to tempt them. It's actually the word that means tempt. And you see, they were tempted. It's always nakah. So as a test. So far, just what we've seen in chapters 1 and 2, how would you score Israel? How's Israel doing?
they're getting an F.
They're getting an F. At least the Western tribes. We're really not told what the Eastern tribes are doing anymore. They kind of left and just kind of fending for themselves. But yeah, they're an F. What about our nation?
Our nation?
Yeah.
F minus.
A G.
A
Let's go
G.
with that.
A C. I want to say a C. Do you know why I want to say a C? Because there's people like us in the world. Not that we are perfect people, but that we are reading God's word, that we are allowing the Holy Spirit to convict us, and that we want to do better, and that we're going to do better. So I think that, yes, right now, if we look at certain things, we could say that it's an F. But I think that those of us who are really trying and really, really want this land, and who are not sitting around and sucking our thumbs and saying, oh, boy, Yeshua, come now. We're not saying that. We're like, we're in it to win it. We're in it to persevere. We're in it for that crown of life at the end. I think that's God will use us for his glory and his kingdom, and that's why I give us a C. What about our church? Churches. I know we're different churches.
Mike's there. I'd say A+.
Now, you don't have to answer this, but what about yourself? Oscar always has to do these self-evaluations at work. What about us? We are just finishing tomorrow night at sundown starts Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And so for the past 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is what's called the 10 days of awe, which is it's literally translates to the 10 days of returning. And it's just a really 10 days of introspect and to really pray and to allow God to speak where your relationship with him is, where you fall short, to allow him really to speak to you, or if you do that, to really allow him to speak and to really look at your life and where you are in relationship to where God wants you to be. And so that's our self test, I guess. And it doesn't have to wait for one time a year. We could do it anytime. But I encourage you to. It's pretty humbling. And then we got frustrated again, because then we did not go to chapter 3.
No,
We did not even go to chapter 10.
we
We
went
went all to the end of the book.
Read that 3 times.
Yes.
I did too.
Chapter 17 all the way to chapter 21. And guess what? Lesson 7, guess what we're going to look at?
17 to 20.
17 to 21.
wow.
I know. I was like, you got to be kidding. So, in my linear thinking, I was like, but yeah, talk about I had to read it over and over. The good thing is we're not going to really nitpick this now because we're going to get more into it later. As in lesson 7, after we've all had a wonderful potluck meal together and we've eaten copious amounts of pie, we are going to sit together and then we'll have to do chapter 17 through 21 again. But then we'll be very full and very happy. So we're going to look at it right now. Okay. This obviously is not in chronological order. This stuff actually happened right in the beginning, and as far as I'm concerned, should be labeled chapter 3. So Dan, I'm just giving kind of historical why this is out of place. Dan named this place Mahane Dan in chapter 18, verse 12. But we are actually going to see that name first used way over in chapter 13:25. So this already comes at least before chapter 13. Then in chapter 20, Phineas is the high priest. Phineas was the son of Eleazar, the grandson of Aaron. He was born before they ever left Israel, way back in Exodus chapter 6. And he was still the priest in Joshua 22, verse 30. However, we know he died. He died. He died in Joshua chapter 23, and his death was reiterated in chapter 2 of the book of Judges. So we know that this is way out of place. And I have a theory of why they put it back here, which we'll go over week 7. Because I don't want to tell you now, because we haven't gotten there yet.
We don't want you to go.
Because we want you to be sure that you're here. There are 2 repeated phrases that are real big in this set of scripture, Judges 17 through 21. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in their own lives. And hopefully, I think she had us mark those. You see those phrases in chapter 17, verse 6, in 18, verse 1, in 19, verse 1. For some reason, they skipped it in chapter 20. And then we see it again in chapter 21, verse 25. And I'm telling you, some of this stuff was probably the craziest stuff I have ever read in scripture until I realized that this stuff is being manifested in congregations all over the world. We see churches professing to be God's church, and yet they are allowing homosexual priests, homosexual marriages, endorsing abortions, overlooking blatant sinful lifestyles in their own leadership, such as unmarried men and women living together as youth pastors. Chapter 17. What in the world is going on? Who can make this make sense? Now, I do want to say that although Judges 17 is out of place, this Micah is not the prophet. This is not good prophet Micah. This is some other man named Micah. So please don't get that confused. We're not that out of order. So what happened? And of course it would happen in Ephraim, right? Did anybody else see that and say there was a man in the hill country named Ephraim and just go, this can't be good. This cannot turn out good. Because Ephraim so far and Manasseh have just been whiny babies, and nothing good has ever come out of Ephraim yet. So, except Caleb. So, Anybody else read that and go, oh, here we go again. Okay, so what happened? Little guy named Micah. And what did he do?
Stole money from his mother.
He
Yeah,
stole money
did.
from his mama. Now,
And his mother blessed him.
Yes,
and he blessed her. He did.
And she rewards him.
yes.
Yeah.
There's some
And said, I took it.
there.
And I think she said, blessed be my son of the Lord, because at least he came and brought it back to her. So whatever he originally stole it for,
She's one of these mothers that can never admit that their kid did anything wrong.
yeah,
Right.
the little bratty child.
Yeah.
The little bratty
She's
child.
an enabler.
There you go. There's our good RA word, an enabler.
Really digging into that verse, aren't you?
And so, when he gave the money back to his mama, and it wasn't like a piddly amount, 1,100 pieces of
Yes,
silver
that was
is
a
a
lot.
A lot of money.
grand amount of money.
Yeah,
You know, one of my kids say, here's your $1,100 I stole from you. I don't care how old they are. They're getting my shoe. I mean,
Yeah.
seriously. All right. So now he's been blessed. And we know now that this is a totally dysfunctional relationship going on over here in Ephraim. What a great, like, soap opera, right? Do they still have those anymore? Right. So he gave it to him. And what the mother say she was going to do with that silver?
Gonna make an idol.
she started giving it away.
To make an idol.
Yes,
Thank you, son. Blessed be you by God for bringing me back my $1,100 you stole. Now, to honor God in this, let's go make an idol. Okay. We need Dr. Phil. Okay, here we go.
Right.
Yep.
And so, did he?
Did he or did she?
yeah.
Yeah, they made shrine.
He
Made shrine.
made images, and it said they were in the house of Micah. So he didn't make just one, he made like a bunch. And then he made a shrine. And he made an ephod. What's an ephod?
I have no clue.
Who wears an
The
ephod?
high priest.
A priest. It's a breastplate, isn't
High
it?
priest.
Breastplate.
With the 12 stones for the 12 tribes of Israel? Yeah. So you talk about syncretism. Now we have idols trying to mix with the priesthood, the godly trying to be mixed with the ungodly in a house in Ephraim. Anybody know what Micah means? Micha,
Who is like,
who is like God.
Ooh.
isn't that Mika Mocha?
Yeah, Micha Mocha is who is like you, Lord, among the gods. So yeah, but Micha, like God.
Huh.
Yeah, this guy, right? Okay. Holy moly. All right, so, and he consecrated one of his own sons to be a priest.
How does he get to consecrate?
He doesn't, because he's doing what's right in his own head. He's doing what's right. So I'm going to take idols. I'm going to make my own ephod. I'm going to consecrate my own son from the wrong tribe. So just even start there. And I'm going to make him a priest of God over my house of idols.
Of idols. Yeah. The whole
Just thought
thing
I didn't want to be standing near there.
He had some medication back then, right? So,
Yeah.
but then, and it says right there in verse 6, because there was no king and every man did what was right in his own eyes. Well, this man, I don't even know where he gets this stuff, but I'm telling you, there's some crazy stuff going on in other people's heads about God too. And then there happened to be a man named Benjamin. Of course, his name was Benjamin. From Bethlehem.
Bethlehem. Yeah.
Who was from the family of Judah, but he was a Levite, right? But he happened to be staying in Ephraim. And he went and he was trying to find a place to stay. And where did he end up?
Micah.
He ended up in Micah's house. So now good old Micah has himself a house priest.
Yeah.
So he took in the Levite, made him a priest. Now, every priest was a Levite. Not every Levite was a priest. He made this Levite a priest and decided God was going to bless him because he had a house priest. Guys, we can't make this stuff up. This is, as my children would say, this is cray cray to Lulu. So, now I know that the Lord will prosper me, seeing as I have a Levite for a priest and a son who's a fake priest wearing a fake ephod and a bunch of idols that were bought from the money I returned after I stole it from my mother. This is a great house, people. This is a great place. Who wouldn't want to live there, right? So, then we get to chapter 18, as if chapter 17 wasn't enough for us. Let's get into chapter 18. And this is in, Dan is out there looking for an inheritance, right? Now, he already was given an inheritance in Judges chapter 1, verse 34. They had land. He had a place to go. They did.
But
They
the
didn't succeed.
Amorites were pushing them out.
Yes, they were bullied. They wouldn't do anything about it. So they decided we're going to leave our inheritance. Is that not, wow, could you not preach that? Left their inheritance and went to go find someplace else to live that they had no business living in. It wasn't their land. But they're going to find someplace else. So, first, it looks like these Danites are actually doing a pretty decent job because they went to Micah's house. They took great issue with the priest being there and of the idols. So they kidnapped the priest and they took all of Micah's idols out of their house. Now, did they burn the idols? No. Did they bury the idols? No. Did they kill Micah and his mother and burn down their house because they were now idol worshipers in God's land?
Nope.
No. At the end of chapter 18, what did they do with them?
Put him in the house of God.
They set up a false priest and false idols in their own temples. So I'm going to steal them from this man. I'm going to make a big old fine howdy-do about this man having them in his house, having these graven images, taking the priest. We're going to kidnap the priest. We're not going to let the poor man go back home. We're not going to do anything. We're going to drag him more somewhere. We're going to set him up in a temple that we are building that we have no business building, in a land where we have no business to be. And to make matters worse, we're going to call it a house of God. Call this man a priest of God. And we're going to put idols in the house of God. Wow. And all God's people said, what?
Cray, cray.
Cray, cray to Lulu. I'm telling you. It's been around. Nothing new under the sun. Does anybody remember where else we see this later on in Israel's history? In the book of Ezekiel, when Ezekiel is in Babylon, it says God took him by the Spirit to show him what was going on in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And he took him to the temple. And in the temple courtyard were women on the temple grounds, praying to a false god. There were people giving sacrifices
Yes.
to false gods. But the priests of the temple in Jerusalem, where God chose to put his name, were in the inner walkways of the temple, drawing pictures of idols that they were worshiping in the house of God. And does anybody remember what God did in that vision?
He left them.
He left the temple. It says his spirit, and it gives you step by step where God went. And where he went was out of the temple.
Eastgate, huh?
Eastgate. And he left. What makes us think in our Western modern hubris that we can set up false priesthoods and idols in the house of God and claim his blessing and expect God to hang around?
That's why I think it's so frightening.
It is.
Mhm.
It is. And if this doesn't scare you, if this doesn't make you go, oh my gosh,
Exactly.
because we know what happened to Israel because of this, and we think it's not going to happen to us. We don't think it's happening now to us.
Exactly.
We don't think that God's showing us signs of this happening to us now. And we are only blessed in the fact that God hasn't decided to leave. But we also can't sit in our pride and decide that we're so good that he's going to stay. I think chapters 19 through 21 are probably some of the most distressing chapters. Because we have another Levite in the territory of Ephraim. They should have just cut Ephraim right on out and just let it float into the ocean, right? Although there was no ocean and he was landlocked. But another Levite in the territory of Ephraim. And what did this crazy person do?
Goodbye.
He took a concubine from Judah. First of all, you're not supposed to, mix tribal stuff. He took a concubine from Judah, which meant the man was already married. But this woman left him and went back home to daddy for 4 months. Now, we don't know why the man left his concubine there for 4 months. But then hubby Levite decides to go and get her back. But he doesn't go and grab her and take her back home. He stays there and decides to get drunk with his father-in-law for 4 days. Because, that's what Levites are supposed to do, right? So then he decides to take her after 4 days of getting drunk with her daddy. He decides it's finally time to go on home. And when they were on their way home, they really didn't have a place to stay. So he didn't really have a plan of what he was going to happen and what was going to happen to him. So who did they meet? When they were sitting in the town square and it was getting dark and it was getting ugly and his little concubine was tired, what happened? They met a nice little old man.
That's one. Yeah.
And that nice little old man said, come on and I will give you shelter and I'll give you food and everything will be good, because you can't be staying out in the middle of town, because this town is not the best place in the world for y'all to be, hanging around outside. Which you wonder why, right? Maybe because the nations are still there. So everything's going to be you just come on into my house. Then things went south really quick. Because then some men decided to show up at this man's house also. Pounded on his door. And what did they want?
Woman.
They wanted the priest.
Yeah.
Did anybody read this and go, ding, 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 Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yeah.
I did. I went, wow, okay, where's the hellfire and brimstone? Didn't come. So he wanted the priest. And the homeowner said, Nah,
No.
take this woman instead. Now, isn't he generous?
Well, he's given his virgin daughter too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I gave a couple.
Yeah.
And his
Concubine.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was pretty generous little dude. He was a good daddy and good host, right?
that made him feel good.
Did it.
Uh.
Yeah, in Sodom
Yeah.
and Gomorrah, yes. So, do we know, is there any indication, or do you guys think that the priest knew what this man had done with his concubine?
Of course he did.
Oh, I'm sure he had to have known.
I don't know. I don't know if he knew until he saw her where?
On the doorstep.
On the doorstep, dead.
Morning.
The next morning. And the reason I don't
Oh my
know
God, in 12 pieces.
is because he did chop her into 12 pieces. And he sent them out to all of the 12 tribes because of the treachery that the tribe of Benjamin allowed to happen.
So you don't think that he knew what was going to happen to her?
I don't know if he
I
knew.
find that if they were gonna in effect rape him, you don't think he knew they were gonna rape her?
Yeah,
I don't know if I don't know. I don't know
I'm with Emily.
if he's more angry at this point that they killed her, that she's dead, or what they did.
I think he's ashamed of himself
Well,
for
it's
allowing it to happen.
that he chopped her up in 12 pieces and he sent her off to a chunk of her to all the 12 tribes because he wanted to show the treachery that the tribe of Benjamin had allowed to happen in their land, like how bad the tribe of Benjamin had actually become, that land had actually become, and how very little Benjamin had actually done
You couldn't send a
to
note.
do anything. Well, I know he couldn't send an email.
Concubine.
This woman, right? She was
Well, I agree. I mean, his message is valid because Benjamin failed on all the way around.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there's no doubt in my mind that he knew what was going to happen to her.
and that he just did nothing.
Oh, I think he was trying to cover his
No,
guilt.
not only did he do nothing, but he went to sleep.
Yeah, see,
He
don't know, maybe
didn't sit up and worry about her. He went to bed.
and that's I know what you're saying, and I know, and I'm trying to be devil's advocate. I guess I just want to know that the poor man.
I've had a problem with this story from the very first time I read it.
I know, Emily, because as women, we want the man to go and do something. We want him to go and chop them up in 12 pieces, and we want him to do something for her. We don't want her to just go to bed.
I've wondered the very first time I remember hearing this. I have a book on tape, and I remember hearing this story, and I had to stop and go get my Bible and read it to make sure I was hearing what I heard.
But it was correct.
And I
Remember this story?
No, I do.
I remember thinking then, and it's valid still. Why is this in the Bible? What are we really learning from this?
Well, we're going to get to that because I think it was a series of events that led up to something else.
Okay.
Because once this happened, the tribes all got together and they were about to annihilate the entire tribe of Benjamin. They were done with Benjamin. And they asked God for 3 days whether they should go up and fight literally their own people. Now, they wouldn't even fight the people in the land, right? But they're going to go after their own people. So they actually prayed. So they did the right thing in my mind. They prayed for 3 days and asked God, is this what we are supposed to do? Is this what you want us to do? Because we have to purge the land of this innocent blood that now this priest has spread over the entire nation. We need to do this. And God said, yes, go take care of the tribe of Benjamin. The tribe deserves it because they have allowed it. So good. And they did. They burned the city down.
Right, I understand that.
They swore to never let Benjamin marry. Nobody from Benjamin is ever allowed to marry any woman from any of the other tribes. Now, Benjamin is very, very tiny.
Right,
And now they've totally destroyed it. So any of the survivors, they are the other 11 tribes agreed they cannot marry any of our wives, any of our, I'm not wives, I'm sorry, any of our daughters.
Yeah.
They can't because they're treacherous and they're guilty, and we can't allow our daughters to then become part of that. We can't do it. But then
but,
they got a little bit of guilt.
right,
They're like, doggone, but you know what? If we don't let them marry our daughters,
it's the end of the tribe.
yeah, they're going to be wiped out. And then what are we supposed to do? Then the inhabitants that survived, that we've allowed to be in there, then what are we going to do? So they came up with a solution. They did
Yeah.
what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah, basically kidnap.
And they did not ask God. Now, I think they didn't ask God because they knew good and well God would tell them, don't do it, this is a stupid idea. And God would have given them a much more pragmatic way to do it. Or if God wanted Benjamin to continue, God would have taken care of it himself. They didn't need to do all of that. So they gave them other people's pagan daughters. Now, two problems with that. One, you are now, who is the biggest influence at this time in history, even now, I think, over children?
Mothers.
Their mamas.
Yeah.
These mamas are now
Hey,
pagan. They're going to raise little children who are pagan in a tribe that already has proven to be very corrupt. And they're sending them to like a really bad place. They burn the city down. So the city has nothing. They're going to have to try to rebuild it and repopulate it with these pagan women that should not have existed in that land.
Well,
These women should have been annihilated and killed along with whoever procreated them, because they were part of the nations and the enemies of Israel that were not supposed to be there. And God said he left them as a temptation, and they gave into the temptation at the very first sign of anything. And so now they have infested and infused one of their tribes with pagan women who are going to raise pagan children, and they never had a problem.
well, not only that, but isn't the Jewish religion, the Jewish race,
Identity, yes.
identity is carried through the matrilineal line. So
Yes.
how is that possible for the Benjamite tribe? How is it able to continue now?
Because now who's going to inherit the land? Who's going to have land inheritance? Pagan children.
But they're not Jewish.
No, they're pagan children who are going to be raised pagan, who are going to believe in pagan idolatry, who are then going to have more children, and they are going to have inherited land rights. They are going to be the ones. So now they are basically repopulating the area with pagan people that should have never been left to begin with. And the worst God, the very worst God that Israel worshipped was themselves. Pride, the idol worship of yourself. And that was the worst God that they worshiped, was themselves. And we are going to see how, and you asked why is this in scripture? Remember, this is taken completely out of chronological order. I truly believe the author of Judges wanted us to give us kind of a couple of stories, a couple of real examples of how bad things had really gotten. So that later on in antiquity, we can sit back and go, how bad could it really have been?
Jeez.
Could it really have been that bad? So I think these are two examples of exactly how bad it had really gotten. And if we have these two examples, both coming out of Ephraim, then we should know that there was probably a whole lot more than just this. But I believe that that's why this is in Scripture. And I am so sorry. I just noticed the time. We are over time. I am so sorry. So I am going to just ask these questions, and then you can just kind of think about them. Is partial obedience complete disobedience? Is partial obedience complete disobedience? Where can indifference, unbelief, and partial obedience lead? And what has happened to our nation since doing what is right in our own eyes become the accepted norm? And how do we as believers combat any of that? And then I just said, Oscar and I have made the decision right now, not right now, but I mean for this moment, that we are sending our boys to public school. Our whole big six were homeschooled. And so now we are delving into this whole public school thing. And I really cannot help but think that we are sending them off into the nations and into Babylon to fend for themselves, which is a very scary thing for me. So how do we raise torchbearers that know God and remember what he's done for them when very soon they're going to spend the vast majority of their days with people who would be more than happy to teach them the exact opposite?
Not in my comment.
And that's where I am. And that's why I go crazy.
How are we thinking?
So that's where we are. Anything? I know we're over, but I do not want to cut anybody off at all.